The events of the past 3 years have been hard on everyone, but especially on our youth. Many of us who are older have the idea that our youth are lost, that they have neither the inclination nor the ability to understand what is happening in our world right now, or to do anything to change it. But that is not true. There are young people who understand that our entire society, and especially their generation, is under attack. And they are already planning how they're going to build a better future for themselves and for their own children when they come along. Mark Trozzi, the son of Mark Trozzi, is the founder of Over to the Youth, a group of young people not just from Canada, but from around the world. The group meets regularly online to discuss the issues we are all facing, to provide each other with support, and most importantly, to build the foundations for the skills and knowledge that will make them future leaders. I'm joined today by Over to the Youth members Mark Trozzi, Madison Holmes, and one of the most recent additions to the group, Evelyn Dove. Madison, Rain, Evelyn, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us, Will.
Now, Madison, I want to start with you because I'm sure to our viewers it's fairly obvious why Rain and Evelyn are part of this group, given who their fathers are. What prompted you to get involved?
I guess if we're talking about fathers, it's not that far off. My whole family jumped into this. Everybody knows that once COVID started, a lot of people started waking up, or at least my family did anyway. And down the line, we started following Freedom Doctors, in which Mark Trozzi, who was big household name here, we started following him, and then he led us to the World Council for Health. And recently, after discovering them, they came out with an animation competition for their logo. I'm a local Albertan artist, and my dad actually sent me the link for the contest. It was like a month away, so honestly, it really went over my head. I was busy doing other things in the house, so it was like I had 2 weeks to do it when I finally just woke up and the idea just came to me. So I did that, and after forgetting about it for another long while, I got the email saying that I had won. And it was through them that they introduced me to Rain and said they had a youth group going, in which we kind of started our own little branch off of. But yeah, it's kind of just snowballed from there. There's no reason as to why I'm being involved. That we screwed up by not getting involved sooner. I'm just playing catch up now.
Yes, didn't we all? Rain, where did the group start? Can you tell us that?
Yeah, sure. So it was a process to get to the vision of Over to the Youth, and it started out when the mainstream media in Canada started attacking my dad about the truth that he was speaking through our website, drtrozzi.org. And when that happened, there rose an opportunity for me within our small operation to do a writing on that. And so the initial idea was to do a counter hit piece on these platforms. But I've been playing around with IT for a while, most of my adult life. And so I had a better idea of how to hurt them and big tech in general. So I wrote an article called A Beginner's Guide to End Big Tech Brainwashing. And we published that on my 21st birthday on drtrozzi.org, and it got over 8,000 reads and slight media coverage. And the blog post that wrote about my article entitled that blog Over to the Youth. And so those words were in my mind from that point onward. And around a week later, we had a visit from a family friend who I ended up having a conversation with over some music jamming in the evening time. And it was all really like just warm and fun experience. And she's an older lady. But it got very intense at one point. She suddenly turned to me and she says, "Rain, you're generation is almost completely underrepresented. And would you consider being a voice? And my initial response was absolute, like, no, because I've been doing these things in the background with my dad and it's had an impact. So there didn't really seem a need to put myself out there, because I'd argue public speaking isn't necessarily my strength. But I was dancing with that for a while as joining the WCH Youth Committee, and looking at avenues of exploration. I really thought, if not me, then who? Like, who can I expect to step into that role if I'm not willing to do it myself?
Very good.
So in that time, I met Madison and met Dr. Tesslori's son, Pablo. And together we initiated Over to the Youth, as it initially was. And it got its it had its second influx of members after the Better Way conference, where I went to speak in regards to building active communities.
So this group is, I want to make this clear for our viewers, this group is not just Canadian youth. You've got people from across the world.
Yeah, we have some people in South Africa and some people in the UK, and we're looking to grow it as it grows, not to deliberately go out of our way to bring in global members, but as it organically occurs, we're having members from multiple countries.
So Evelyn, that makes you the newest member of the group. You joined a couple of months ago. How many people typically show up to these weekly meetings?
Between 6 and 7, I think is usually the round amount, right, guys? Yeah, about 6 to 7 people. But yes, I'm the most recent member, at least here in this meeting. We have had a couple new members in the meantime, actually, which has been pretty cool, pretty interesting. Nice to see them talking in the chat and getting to know each other. Yeah.
Now, you say between 6 and 7 show up to the meetings every week, but it's different people. So in total, Rain, about how many youth are involved now?
We're just shy of 25 members.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Now, what I want to get into now is what is it that you guys are discussing? And I know it's a broad range of topics. I'm going to ask each of you in turn to tell me a topic that you've been discussing recently that was of interest to you. Madison, would you start?
Yeah, our most recent meeting was on the degradation of our generational connection, starting with, elders, and how our mentor, David, actually told us a story about how there's an elephant tribe. And if you remove all of the elder male elephants, all of the younger ones, they just start dying off over time. And it's not too far from our society right now. I mean, our youth are not connected to our generations before us, and there's a loss of wisdom because of it. And that's what we were talking about, and ways to fix that, and how it's affected us personally, realizing that even a lot of us in Over to the Youth don't have idols and members and elders to look up to guide us along the way. So that was our most recent one.
All right. I'm going to come back to that in a bit, because I'm going to want your thoughts on what it is that you all discussed. But Rain, I'm going to do ladies first on this one. Evelyn, recent topic that the group discussed that was of interest to you.
Not so much of a recent topic, but something that we do usually at the start of every meeting is we do a sort of roll call. We go between all the members, check in, see how everyone's doing, see what problems anyone might be dealing with, or what good things might be happening in their lives. And if someone's been feeling down or is having a problem, we'll usually dedicate part of the meeting to helping that person figure out what's going on in their life and try to make them feel better by the end of the meeting. So that's something that I've really enjoyed.
So it would be fair to say that it's not just a social awareness group, it's a support group for youth.
Yes, very much so. Everyone gets a little bit of support, and it's been fantastic. It's actually part of the reason why I found myself joining. You know full well that we've had a lot of isolation going on, and I found myself quite lonely. And then you helped put me in touch with Rain, who got me into OTTY, and it's been fantastic.
Good. Rain, recent topic of discussion that was of interest to you.
There's a topic that's always recent because it always comes up, but it's a topic of our vocabulary and often our subconscious vocabulary. And our mentor David, he's really a master of this and also helping people upgrade through mastering their language. And three things that come to mind in the context of that is speaking in you statements versus I statements. So it's better to speak in I statements because when I do that, I own what I say rather than saying, oh, well, when you do this and you feel this way, you might go, I don't feel that way. What are you talking about? I don't do that. But what I'm really doing is I'm inferring to myself. So that's an empowering one. One that David hit me with right from the get-go, which I was very guilty of, was excessive apologies. So that very Canadian psyop nice thing where I was always saying like, so sorry, oh, sorry, and really never meaning it, but also disempowering myself by putting myself into a victim mindset in conversations without subconsciously knowing it. And then the third one that comes to mind is statements of uncertainty. So including words like, or kinda. On one hand, we could say, well, that's a bad thing. What it really is a friend and an indicator to demonstrate like when we're uncertain of something. So it gives us an opening to explore that thought.
Now, you keep making reference to your mentor. Can you tell me a little bit more about him?
Well, David is a professional facilitator, or in other words, a soul mechanic. And he joined over to the youth during the Better Way conference in Bath. That's where we met. And yeah, he's really been a strong paternal figure for the whole group and being a mentor to everybody within Over to the Youth. So very generous with his time and his wisdom.
All right, we're going to get back to that as well. Madison, I want to come back to you because you were talking about the disconnect between youth and the elders, and you gave that allegory about the elephants, and when the older male ones wander off, the young ones just die. And you saw a parallel there with our society now. Could you expand on that idea?
Yeah. The recent meeting, I actually wanted to thank David, and he's not our only mentor. We got, I think, 3 consistent ones now, including a lady named Laura. And then my dad has actually stepped in as a mentor, which is super neat. But the idea that Over to the Youth was so intriguing to me is even when I tell people about it, because I'm in lots of local, freedom associated groups here in Calgary, and they say, what is Over to the Youth? And it's not just a support group for youth that are ostracized and like-minded, get together and catch up, but we're guided by people older than us, mentors, elders that are trying to help us because we don't know what we're doing and we're trying to admit it, and it's bridging the gap. And that's the coolest thing about Over to the Youth to me, is trying to reconnect that, because all the time, even Rain said earlier, your youth, your generation isn't represented. And partly it's because we don't know how to be represented, don't know how to represent ourselves. And that comes with not being connected with people that are older than us who have walked the line longer than we have. So that's one of the big things I love about Over to the Youth.
I'm going to ask this question now, and I'm going to ask each of you in turn. So I'm going to pick on Rain first, but ladies, you can be thinking about your own answer to this, because you are. Many of you you're from families that have been fighting this war since it started. We've been, you're well aware of what's going on in the world and how our society has been devolving. And the youth have been very much marginalized and left out in the cold, and it's been probably hardest on your generation. And so I want to ask this question: what do you think is the greatest challenge facing youth today? And not necessarily just in Canada, because you've got members from around the world.
Well, we have a plethora of dilemmas. We could look at chemical poisoning. So like artificial estrogen from plastic pollution, microplastics. So that affects men's testosterone, fertility. That also affects girls in such a way that there's a lot of early puberties and hence a lot of more breast cancers in younger people than there ever was. So there's the whole environmental chemical disaster from EMF to chemtrails. And then there's the psychological element of our education institutions are brainwashing institutions. I found myself when I had come to the end of my time in high school with very high average and working very hard in a system that very much rejected me. I realized like, whoa, university is a freak show. If I go there, I'm not going to get smarter. I'm going to turn into like a very bogged down version of myself, and I'm going to be in debt for it. So we have the issue of the Frankfurt schools, 1940s developed up till now, where our universities are the center of the academic plague in Western society right now. It's just like Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. It's almost word for word out of that novel. And then you have the issue of like victims make victims, right? There's a lot of fathers who are fatherless. And so there's the passing down of intergenerational pain through lineage. And like Madison was alluding to with the story of the elephant tribes, like there's an absence of elders, especially when you take kids from the age of 6 in Canada or in the UK 4, and you put them into a white walled institution where they're only surrounded by their peers and 1 or 2 or 6 brainwashed teachers. You're not getting that parental guidance. You're not getting that elder input from the grandparents. I think the environmental pressure of this is forcing many of us to see it. And in seeing it, we're finding ways around it. And I'd say that especially members of Over to the Youth are incredibly resilient young people. And I think that they're going to be leaders in the future that we're coming into in building the new Renaissance.
Right. Evelyn, same question for you. What do you think is the greatest threat to youth today?
In an odd way, I'd unfortunately have to say themselves. The thing that I've noticed the most that's contributed to a lot of my generation's problems is a combination of moral decay and loss of priorities. Due to how a lot of their parents have turned out and the culture that's formed around them, they found themselves drifting further and further from the Western moral ideals that formed our countries, formed our societies, and falling more and more into selfishness and a lack of care for people around them, or at least a lack of understanding on how to show and act upon that care. And again, a loss of priorities, putting small, petty things over what really is important. Taking care of the people around us, stewardship of those who can't look out for themselves or haven't yet found the strength to stand on their own 2 feet yet. And yeah, that's what I would say is probably the main contributor. I think that's a threat to the youth today. The main roadblock is that mental lack of stability and structure, and that emotional instability that comes from being taught to isolate yourself through falling into that mindset.
And do you think that that might be a result of what Madison was talking about with a lack of leadership from the previous generation?
Oh, definitely part of it. We know that things like this tend to happen in cycles. And about 80-year cycles is what it takes from first when a disaster happens and the generation after that smartens up for the next 2 generations after that to slowly forget those morals, forget what they learned, and begin to distance themselves from the older generations, and for the older generations to become more self-absorbed in turn. So it happens in increments. We've discussed before, you and I, that what makes a strong person is you take a good person, put them through hardship, and if they come out the other side with their morals intact, they're a strong person. But as you get further and further away from an inciting event, like say the World Wars would probably be one of the last ones, the more recent one, at least until now. And you've got less and less people who have been through genuine hardship and come out the other side, not unscathed, but come out the other side with their morals intact. And I would say that, yes, that's a contributing factor.
Madison, it's your turn now. I've been using a term in my question. I want to revise it. I've been using the term threat, and I don't think I should. I think the right question to be asking is, what do you think is the greatest challenge facing youth today?
You know, both of them touched points, and I guess an overall arc to map on both of them is an education. You know, we don't know ourselves, our minds, our bodies, and I mean, that's true of everybody. Everybody's supposed to continue learning themselves over time, but we are especially uneducated now. And it's not just your usual, oh, we're naive. I mean, we don't know how our brains work, let alone trying to understand the external threats that are around us. I mean, I wrote an article for Over to the Youth on our website that addressed that. There is so much outside of us that we cannot control. And sometimes I'd argue we can't even control ourselves. But to at least learn and try to manage what is here will help us with whatever comes our way to become a stronger person, as Evie said. But this starts with education, starting to learn things, ask the questions. Critical thinking is gone.
It is indeed. And do you have any ideas on how we can fix that? How can we teach young people? And I think this is a question for all of you, but I'm going to start with Madison. Because I do believe that critical thinking skills can be taught, but we're certainly not doing it these days. As Rain said, they're brainwashing conformity factories. They're definitely doing everything but teaching young people how to think. Do you think there's a way to fix that?
For me personally, what I found is honestly reading I started with my own psychology and my biology, you know, as a young woman. Being young, there are things like my frontal lobe is not developed, you know, and that explains some of the mood swings we go through. So if I have a down day, which, okay, all youth do, we definitely go through emotional mood swings. Even understanding something as simple as that, there's understanding. You can give yourself some grace, some empathy. You can communicate with others. Hey, so-and-so, I'm not on my day today. And things like that, you have to start small. You know, that's a Jordan Peterson typical thing, incremental progress. Start with your day by day, make each day by day easier for yourself. And then you can start moving out. That's how my family did it. We started working on ourselves. And once we got a bit of a handle on that, still working on it, then we went to the community, and now we're trying to expand there. So it's the same with Over to the Youth. We went through a process where we got a little bit, you know, trigger happy and wanted to invite all these people and monetize things. And we were like, no, we're losing some of the things we love about Over to the Youth. So we took a step back and went, let's hone what we love about what we have. And that was the community. And now things are slowly, organically starting to build back up. So I think that answered the question.
It did. Rain, I'm going to ask you now, and not just specifically, how do we teach critical thinking skills? I think what we're really asking here, the question is, how do we change the environment in which youth are growing up and being educated in order to prepare them to, I think maybe the right term is, be much better stewards of their generation and of our society than the previous generations have been?
I think I could speak to that from a male perspective, if that's all right.
Please do.
I think that with the way kids are raised these days, there's for boys, there's too much maternal energy in the boys' development, too much like helicopter parents. and far too much letting the kids lead. And so I think, ideally starting from a young age, like, they need boundaries. Otherwise, they're pushing on these walls that keep moving whenever they just touch them. And there's no foundation in that. How can a boy ground himself in reality to the world around them and then go out as a young man with this false set of ideas of like, oh, the world revolves around me and everybody's going to pander to my needs or my proposed needs. But when they go out into the world, they're shocked because they're like, wait, the world doesn't work like it does when I'm with mom and dad. I think for a young man, learning to take responsibility, not pushing the buck, like seeing a problem and not thinking, oh, it's someone else's problem. If it's within my field of things in front of me that are my responsibility, I take ownership of it and I get it done rather than waiting for someone else to pick that up from me. So I think combination of incremental progress, but also like young men realizing, no, you're responsible for yourself and you're going to have a growing list of responsibilities. So I'd say start with the man in the mirror, no matter where you're at.
And I love your answer, so I'm going to pursue it just a little bit farther, because I myself have given this a great deal of thought of what's the problem these days, and I agree with you very much. And I'm not in any way, Evie will tell you, my wife will tell you, I'm absolutely not in any way. Editors, take this out because I'm struggling for a word here. Chauvinistic. I accept men and women are different but equal. We each have our strengths and weaknesses. But I think a big part of what's wrong with our society is that the men have failed. We have not accepted responsibility. We have not taken on a leadership role. And that leadership role can be it can be what your dad does, it can be what I do, or it can just be a leader in your own home. And a leader, he doesn't give commands, he models. He lives by example. Do you think that that's really what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. I think striving towards that as a young man, that's key. Like, not everybody's at the point in their character development of a 40-year-old, well-developed, well-evolved, well-accomplished man. Some people are 16-year-old boys entering manhood. But embracing it, going the hard route, jumping into the deep end, that's how you make men, right?
It is.
Our society doesn't make men. So it comes down to individual responsibility to make a man of ourselves.
Evelyn, your thoughts?
I think you guys touched on something that actually applies to both sexes in terms of what's gone wrong with our society. Something very important, and that is, I feel certain parental values have fallen through. Certain people haven't done their job as parents because they've been there either been there too much for their kids or too little. For example, you see those parents who are raising their kids basically on an iPad. They're not raising their kids, the internet is, which we can all figure from start is not a great idea, not a good way to go about things. But in my mind, the role of a good parent is, think of a tightrope. Your job is to let the kid walk that rope on their own, but you're supposed to be the net that catches them, helps them find their feet and get back up there. You don't walk them across. You don't always hold their hand. You're there to support them and guide them through life and let them make their own mistakes and face certain consequences. Let them know that they don't stand alone, but they do have to take a stand. You can't go through life on easy mode, assuming everything will come when you want it to. Life is hard. And I feel like kids aren't taught that in the right ways. Right now, the mentality seems to be life is hard, so I'm going to be cruel, or I'm going to be shallow. I'm going to cope by not caring. Or life is hard, I'm going to make it everyone else's problem. That's not the answer. That's weak. That is weakness. You're letting life change you and make you into a worse person. rather than facing that trial by fire and coming out stronger and a more kind, loving person on the other end. And kids these days aren't given that. I've seen parents. I was working, actually, this, for 2 years, during the first 2 years of the whole COVID scare, the whole COVID pandemic. And I saw people come in with their little kids in masks. And one little girl's mask fell down once while her family was on their way out of the store. And the mom completely freaked out. She was panicking, pulled it up like rather violently on the girl's face. And the girl was terrified herself. And I think that shows some of the very real weakness that's going on right now is the generation that's supposed to provide support, provide guidance, is in themselves terrified children. They are not taking responsibility for themselves or their education to stay up to date on what's actually going on in the world and do their own thinking. They are terrified and controlled by the media without even fully realizing it. And that in turn is weakening the generation after them. So to answer your question, let people make their own mistakes. Be there to catch them when they fall, but make sure, again, to reiterate what I said, let them know they don't stand alone, but that they do have to stand.
From my next question for all three of you, and Madison, I'm going to start with you, but I need a minute to phrase this question because it has to do with things that both Rain and Evelyn have said. Rain, earlier you were talking, when I asked you the question about the greatest threat to our youth, you mentioned a few things like EMF and chemtrails. But what was significant was what you didn't say. You did not include in that global warming. And Evie, of course, made reference to the, COVID pandemic. And I have to assume it's because you guys know those things are, sorry, folks, utter bullshit. And you're well aware of it. And you're surrounded by a generation that's buying into this. And it's not because of mainstream news, because people your age typically don't watch mainstream news. They're getting these messages on social media. And so the question I have to ask is, do you think that there's some way that flood of, quite frankly, lies that are brainwashing people, scaring people on social media, if it can be effectively countered? Madison, your thoughts?
Yes, I do think that it can be countered. It can be turned around. I mean, I have a friend who is in OTTY, and she was all about global warming and how the environment is suffering at the hands of our cruel human being hands. And, my sister used to ask me, because she kind of turned around, how did you do it? But it's not about me. I didn't have magical powers that told her all of the secret knowledge that I gathered and changed her mind. It was partly just respect. She respected me enough to hear me. And I was honest with the fact that I'm not certain in all my answers. Okay. I mean, I'm 95%, but there's a 5% chance I'm wrong. And that openness, that willingness to talk about it is how she started coming around. I would send her videos. Sometimes she didn't watch them. Sometimes she did. And so I do believe it can come around. I mean, I've seen it happen. It's a lot of it is to putting that stupid media away, not getting all your information off of that. Because even me, back in junior high, I believed 100% that we were overpopulated. I totally did. It's like, none of these issues would be happening if we just had less people on the planet. And I didn't watch the news. I didn't get that from any of that. That was just media. So, but once I pulled myself out of it, I can start thinking again. The clouds start clearing up and the chemtrails go away. So yes, I do think it can.
Rain, your thoughts?
I think focusing on quality over quantity is key to any real change. I don't see changing people's perspective through platforms that are engineered to manipulate their perspective in a particular top-down authoritarian way. It's an uneven battlefield. So going on to Facebook, YouTube, even depending on Google SEO, like these things aren't for us, they're against us. And they're against us in the sense that they're against the positive future of our species as free thinkers collectively. So unplugging is a big key. And a lot of young people, and I could speak from experience, have addictions. So addictions to video games, addictions to pornography, addictions to any type of consumptive dopamine, social media. It's more addictive than cocaine. The dopamine release from going through Facebook feeds and getting likes, that hit is as or more so addictive than cocaine. So really looking at these things as an addiction and understanding, okay, so those 20-year-olds to 30-year-olds, that's the first wave of people that grew up with that addiction fed to them in an unfiltered way. And now we have the second generation going through internet addictions, which I think has the potential to be a lot worse. But I think that our kids, as we reach parenthood, we're the first ones that get it. We're like, oh, first principles. We know what childhood dopamine addictions looks like and what it means. So I think unplugging as many of our peers as we can now, and then voting through our lineage by protecting our kids from the addictive habits that's presented through the internet and through consumptive dopamine, and then introduce it to them in such a way that they really get the wizard skills out of IT. I mean, for me, I spent my whole teenage years addicted to video games to such an extreme that I was playing 10 plus hours a day and skipping school. Might have been a good thing in hindsight, skipping school, but I missed a lot. But my kids aren't going to go through that because I went through that, and they're going to get the benefits of that evolution. So I think looking at it on a low time preference or a long ranged perspective, we can solve this, and we will.
Evelyn?
All right. So how do we counter misinformation in social media? All right. Well, actually, kind of touching back on what Madison said, one of the best things we can do is to make sure we come across to the people in our lives as someone who is both respectful and worth respecting, a clear, dependable thinker, and someone people want to listen to, or at least are willing to give a chance to listen to. Live your life by example and live with a certain amount of confidence, but again, with some respect to make sure that, like, except 5% possibility, you might be wrong. And keep an open mind, and hopefully people will be drawn to that. And at least for the people immediately in your life, that can help change their minds a bit. Plant the seeds that could grow into understanding of what's really going on, or a desire to look into it. As for on a widespread scale, things like this make it of varying levels of intensity and seriousness. Some people aren't quite ready for things to be full on. Sometimes they need to be eased into it. Most people need to be eased into it. I've found that the harder you push someone to understand something, the more they'll push back. That sort of cognitive dissonance of, I can't let myself be wrong. So you have to be subtle about it, be patient. Patience is key here. But there are ways of doing it. And again, you're doing it even with this and with Over to the You. We are working on some ways of countering the misinformation out there. And part of it is also just waiting for social media to eat itself alive, or watching mainstream news, self-destruct.
So I have such a plethora of questions in my mind, but we'd be here for hours. So I'm going to try to pick what I think is probably the best one, because I try to end all of my interviews on a note of optimism. And I know that you guys have given our viewers a great deal of hope just by what you're doing, because there's a lot of people my age who really think that the youth generation is just lost. Like there's nobody in your generation who understands what's going on or is dedicated to building a better world or to truth over the lies that are coming out of media and from our governments. And you've aptly demonstrated that that's not true. And so I want to ask this question, and it's a very simple one. Madison, what gives you hope?
Oh, Lord. There's a list, and it's a really long list. I'm not an optimist, but I have such a great family, and they give me hope every day. We go to freedom rallies and freedom people, and even just things like good energy, smiling to people and saying, "How was your day?" That gives me hope. Listening to good tunes, that gives me hope. It's high energy, okay? And there's so much high energy, love, laughter, and they can't. I've understood now, because I used to wonder, men, society, are we inherently violent? The animal, the Darwin's evolution that they're telling us was what we are. Are we just like that in nature? And I've decided that it's not the case. We're capable of violence. We're capable of malevolence. But I don't think we operate there. I think we operate and like to work with one another in communities. And I've seen people change, and I'm changing too. And over to the youth, I'm meeting more youth every day, even if they don't necessarily do the research, because we have a member that doesn't read, just flatly says, nope, won't do it. But they put themselves in an environment, a community of other people who do. So now they're still gaining the knowledge. There's just too much good energy to not be hopeful, in my opinion. So
Rain?
Our attention is the most valuable asset that we have. And there's so many things that want to draw our attention, different egregores. And recent revelation I've been going through over the last few months is like, I don't need to put my attention into that or into that, because even though it's addictive, even though it's like exciting, it's scary, what I'm starting to realize is I don't really care. And I want to put all my attention into the things that I'm doing to make my life better, to make the world better. And so reallocating my attention as being central to me finding hope. And the other thing is, there's this thing called Bitcoin, I wanted to see Madison's reaction there, but I talk about Bitcoin a lot because it's often a very misunderstood technology. It's thrown in with like CBDCs and stuff that's just not the same. But what Bitcoin gives us is a whole new operating system to build on, because we could look at the whole fiat world, right? Everything founded in Rockefeller dollars, petrodollars, fiat money, fake debt-based, theft-based economies, and then how everything is downstream of that. Everything's downstream of value. So we have this big skyscraper of stuff based on fiat, and we have all these top level problems that people are waking up in the last 2 years and going, the world's so crazy, we need to fix this problem on the top floor. So they go down 3 stories and they try to fix it there, but the elevator just takes them back to the same symptomatic issues because they're going for the symptoms rather than the problems. And that was me for a long time. But what gives me hope in addiction to reallocating my attention to things that matter is actually there's this whole other economic global system that is by the people, for the people, controlled by the people, and regulated by the people, and no central bank or government has any influence on it. And building my solutions there. Build my solutions there. I know that it's actually going to be there. There's not going to be some third-party custodial that can shut it down or take it away from me or freeze my accounts or introduce a new bill that regulates my speech. So I think that the technology is coming along, much like when the rifle came along. There was a huge decentralized decentralization and power. And it's a race for the future. What's it going to be? Is it going to be central bank digital currencies, tyrannical top-down technocrats, or is it going to be Bitcoin? And that's largely up to us and where we put our attention.
Well said. Evelyn, you get the last word.
All right. Well, thank you, Papa. What gives me hope? Oh boy, this is going to be a bit of an answer. Mine is a bit similar to Madison's, and one of the foremost things is family. Having good people in my life who I can rely on to talk to and go through this with me. But I think the things that really give me hope most of the time is just appreciating the simple stuff. Looking for the beautiful things in the world around me, because it's so easy to see the bad stuff. The bad stuff's always going to be there. It's always going to find you. And we as humans seemingly are programmed to look for the negative. But we can't let that completely overwhelm us. And I've put a lot of time and effort into training myself how to look for the good things, to appreciate the tiny things in life. Look at a blue sky and some sun, or I don't know, a dandelion or a butterfly, and think, you know what? The world's pretty okay. There's good things in the world that will always be there, no matter what happens. And if I can learn how to count on those things that really will always be there for me, even in little ways, I'll be okay. As well as learning how to have faith in myself. I consider myself a rather naturally at peace person, and it's given me a lot of emotional resilience. So a combination of faith in myself and the people around me, and just appreciating those simple, little, beautiful things in life, because there's so many of them, and we don't pay nearly enough attention to them.
Well said. Rain, if people wanted to join this group, how do they find you?
Go to overtotheyouth.com, no spaces, and use the contact form.
Very good.
And having Telegram and Zoom is a prerequisite.
Thank you so much.